Hello and welcome to the Brick Cave Media Podcast. My name is Marcus Campbell, poet and author of My Identity as a Stereotypical Side Character from Brick Cave Books. Joining me tonight is my co-host, fellow poet and author, Patrick Hare. How you doing?
Good. Hi, Marcus. Patrick Hare here, author of I wrote this book once. Corporate Boilerplate Vinegar from Brick Cave Books. The Brick Cave Podcast is brought to you by the BC Book Club, Brick Cave Media's community portal for readers that love Brick Cave books and authors.
Gotta love it. So we were just down in Tucson for the Tucson Festival of Books. How did that go for you?
It went pretty well. It's fun to be considered an authority figure just because you're sitting up there on stage.
It is. Something about the elevated platform makes it feel kind of pulpitish. You know, feels like I have power over other people. Even though it's completely arbitrary, but I do find myself sometimes like getting, like you were saying, with it makes you feel like an expert. Where I almost like my tone will start. I'm like, that's not how I talk. Why am I trying to be overly formal here? What am I doing? This is just.
Well, that was the fun of it. Is like, okay, you guys are asking me questions. Like, I'm not just as qualified as anybody sitting in the audience right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And that brought up an interesting side point that I thought Bob and I talked about it briefly, but it merits mentioning here. And while we're on the subject, Bob and I were talking about how it's interesting how the line in the digital era, it seems like the line between novice and expert and the line between amateur and professional is becoming increasingly blurry. And it's hard to determine or even qualify who or what is an expert in a given thing or who or what is a professional in a given
Yeah, if you're
task.
good at BSing and people don't seem to care about your credentials almost. I mean,
Yeah, but it's almost like, what is a credential in the post?
That's a good point. It's
digital
not like you're speaking at a conference and you got your degree and you've got all that other stuff. It's well, here's my opinion on something, and you have to believe me because I've written a book.
Yeah, it's kind of arbitrary, and so many people have written so many books. And then the line used to be, okay, you were kind of an amateur if you were self-publishing, and then when you got with a big publishing house, you were like a professional. Well, that line no longer exists because there are plenty of self-published authors who are just as successful as people at large big box stores, so there's no line there, or with large publishing companies. There's no real line between, oh, I self-published and somebody helped me self-publish versus there's no lines for like what is a professional. So are you a professional writer or an expert once you've sold X number of books? And if so, what number of books would that be? Because then that like monetizes writing, and that feels bizarre as well.
It's always kind of been monetized, I guess. But like if you're a TikTok star, you could be right up there as well. Like just because you've got an audience.
Yeah.
People like your stuff, and you can probably push quite a few books doing that too.
Exactly. And then it's interesting that the quantifiers of success seem to have kind of shifted a little bit.
Well, I don't know. That could be a good thing. I mean, you can fake it now.
Yeah. Fake it till you make it kind of deal. Yeah.
But it was fun because like one of my panels was like the importance of the opening line, which of course but it's always been important. Mm-hmm. So it's like for most of my stuff, well, that's where I got to hook people to set the tone of the piece, and drive the rant in the right direction, essentially, when I'm reading something. So, but at the same time, any piece of fiction, whether from a dark and stormy night all the way up to best of times, worst of times.
Yeah, that was literally the one that was in the front of my head. It was like stereotypical opening sentences.
These are great opening lines, but you got to keep people reading the rest of the first page and into the book.
Yes, I agree. Do you give any credence to, because some people have been playing more with titles, and Bill Campana, obviously known for incredibly long titles. I myself love a good title. Do you think that the title would be the relationship between that title and that first line shares any kind of, especially with poetry where you don't just have the title of the manuscript, you have all these individual titles along the way. Do you think that there's any value to be added there for you in your poetry, or do you kind of skip over that?
I usually write the title after I've written the piece, so probably not.
See, that's interesting. I'm the exact opposite. I often start with the title and then everything kind of bleeds out of the title. And sometimes I'll do that very corny and already overused, kind of little trope of making the title, the first line, run into the. I don't like it. I'm not going to do it anymore. But
It works.
Book number 2 is
Like,
just
like
going to
every
be
Emily-
not doing a lot of like kitschy stuff that I did in book 1.
Every Emily Dickinson title is the first line of the poem.
Yes.
So
It works for her when she was doing it. I don't know
Right,
if it works
exactly.
for me when I'm just copying Emily Dickinson. So. But I also do this weird thing related to your first line thing. Sometimes I do this weird thing where I'll read the last line of a book or the last paragraph of a book in the very beginning. Like once I've decided, okay, this is a book I'm going to actually finish, like with Dune, which I just read for the first time recently. I know I'm behind, but I read the last paragraph before I started actually getting into the meat of the book. I find that it gives me like this weird point that I'm trying to like reach or understand, because it always has zero context, but is like ripe with meaning, that last paragraph or that last line. I don't know if there's any. Do you think what's the contrast between the first line and the last line of a book or a poem?
That's a really good question. I mean, like you've got 1984, where it's like the last line is "And he loved Big Brother," so it's like you got brainwashed into the whole system at the end of the book.
Yeah,
After trying to resist all that time.
Yeah, and there's like this. There's also there's this interesting relationship almost with like film, because film is very cognizant of the first shot and the last shot mirroring each other. Like it's one of the foundational things in film. Christopher Nolan does it a lot with hands, where like a film will start with hands and then end with the character's hands, and then the change in whatever opening and closing shots or shot sequences are supposed to have kind of portrayed the shift over time, which I tried to do in my book of poetry, but I think I miserably failed at. I tried to make the last line of the poetry part of the manuscript kind of have some kind of correlation to kind of where it all started. I don't know if I succeeded in that, but do you find yourself playing with last lines at all?
Well, I try to get that kick or zinger. I mean, for slam poems especially, you have to, you have to deliver where they're going to hold up a higher score if your stuff doesn't just trail off into oblivion.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you find yourself going for that mic drop moment even when you're not doing slam? Like, does that kind of tend to seep out into your
Sometimes
other
it
work?
happens, yeah. It's like, okay, I want to put a punch on the end of this. It's, you can make something that's a little bit more muted, but it's like, well, I am trying to say something here, and I've got to sum it up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you think it detracts from your work at all. But then I was thinking about when I go for mic drop moments, and I think even going for the mic drop moment as I'm writing, trying to end it with a punch, even if I end up just having it kind of end in a little more lackluster of a fashion, often ends up helping me find like the theme or the symbol or the meaning that I was really trying to drive home over the course of the poem. Especially when I'm like free writing. So if I'm free writing and I'm getting towards the end and I'm getting towards that last line and I'm trying to go for this big mic drop moment, often in attempting to go for that mic drop moment, I get to kind of the meat of what I was trying to talk about, and then I'm able to go back in revisions and kind of work back towards that last line again and kind of play in that space.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I have to come back later and just rewrite the whole end of the poem to get that moment, because it's like always, I'm doing something else when it finally hits me. Okay, this is how I can end it, or this is how I can, punch it up a little bit. But I never put that much thought into it.
Yeah,
That's a problem. Like, I just do it.
yeah. I mean, there's probably.
I think maybe that's the problem. The problem with the panel once again. It's like, oh, what's your secret? I'm like, I just type this stuff.
Yeah, I think
it comes out of my brain and I write it down.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with artistic panels. Like looping back on that, it's like, what is an expert in art? Like so many artists that are legends and are canonical weren't successful in their own time. And then, I mean, I'm sure there were plenty of hacks in their time that were up on stage constantly. Like Kafka, Picasso, like numerous artists and writers that were famous only after their time. I'm sure there were plenty of hacks telling people how to write the fiction that Kafka was writing in like a room somewhere holed up. You know what I mean?
Except they would have been saying his stuff was crap. And,
right. Yeah. I just think it's very interesting, and post-internet it only gets even more confusing. What other panels did you sit on while you were down there? Any others?
There was the one about